You know the story. A young mermaid watches a prince on a sunlit deck, saves him from drowning, trades her voice for legs, endures pain with every step, and dies to foam, or, in the kinder version, wins a human heart and a crown. But the fairy tale you learned at bedtime is a polished veneer. The original currents beneath it run cold, full of real-world horrors. Dozens of historical practices, legal codes and spectacles map exactly onto the mermaid's bargains and losses. Once you trace those parallels, the story stops being a quaint lesson about love and starts reading like a manual for how societies have muzzled, sold, and erased women for centuries. Picture Copenhagen in 1837. The harbor is flat and gray, gulls shriek, and horse clatter echoes off wet cobbles. Hans Christian Andersen puts down his pen. His tale, Den Lille Havfru, appears that year in New Fairy Tales, published in November 1837. You can almost smell the ink and candle wax as he writes about a girl who sacrifices her voice. But here's what that silencing really represents. In the 16th through 18th centuries, voice for women is not metaphor. It's legal and economic. Court records from Chelmsford, 1566, detail the trial of Agnes Waterhouse, accused of witchcraft. The transcripts show how a woman's testimony is twisted, dismissed, then used to hang her. When the world strips speech from a woman and brands its sorcery, that is the exact bargain the mermaid makes. Give up your words, and maybe you live. But it gets darker. Mermaids losing their voices traces to a pattern of witchcraft accusations and the expropriation of midwives' power. In Pendle, Lancashire, 1612, the records of the Lancaster Assizes list Alison Device and Anne Whittle, known as Chaddocks, among those accused. Their knowledge of herbs and childbirth becomes proof of malice. The accused do not simply lose their voices, they lose their livelihoods and their children. Across the Atlantic, Salem's court records in June 1692 show Bridget Bishop's testimony used against her until she is executed on June 10th, 1692. Children hear a girl trading her voice for legs. Historians see a world where women's speech and skill are recast as dangerous and then legally extinguished. Now look at the mermaid's tale, the impossible change into legs, and the price. Every step feels like walking on knives. This is not mere fantasy pain. Picture a room in a seaside trading port in 1842, where, in a small circus tent in New York, P.T. Barnum is already advertising the Fiji mermaid. The crude carcass, stitched ray to monkey, varnish flaking, sits beneath dim lamps, and the crowd leans in past a wash of fishy, lacquered odor. Barnum's hoax profits by turning the female body into a spectacle and rewriting it into something both erotic and monstrous. The mermaid's agonized steps echo the lived violence of surgical and social procedures performed on women for property, marriage, or spectacle. In courts across Europe, women are physically shamed and exhibited, often paraded in stocks, publicly humiliated to uphold social order. The mermaid's literal inability to walk without blood becomes a metaphor for how society rigs women's mobility with pain and punishment. Here's what's truly horrifying: the prince. Children see romance. Historians see property transfer and inheritance. Primogeniture and marriage contracts are the human equivalent of being claimed by a prince. Picture an estate chamber in 1820s England or Denmark. The ledgers, the marriage settlements, the inked clauses that transfer a woman's assets into a husband's control. Until laws such as the Married Women's Property Acts in various countries, England's final major reform arriving in 1882. marriage often meant economic erasure. Anderson sets the Little Mermaid's fate toward union with a prince, but the underlying narrative mirrors centuries of legal customs that convert women into conduits for male lineage and wealth. The prince is not a lover alone. He is a legal mechanism by which women are absorbed into male dynasties. The horror does not stop there. Consider the mermaid's final dissolution into sea foam, the complete erasure of personhood. This motif maps directly onto practices of disposability. In port cities from Lisbon to New England, anonymous female remains wash ashore after shipwrecks or are cast out in the name of morality. In 16th century natural histories, Conrad Gessner's Historiae Animalium, 1558, prints sightings and mermaid reports, alongside instructions on classifying monstrosities, reflecting how the early modern mind conflates unusual bodies with moral deviance. Those texts underwrite a culture that treats female bodies as curiosities or warnings, not as individuals. The disappearance into foam is, in cold terms, the social erasure that follows accusation, spectacle, or refusal. No trial, no record, just a footnote in a ship's log. There are more concrete examples. In 1842, Barnum's Fiji Mermaid Tour shows how commercial entertainment commodifies and dehumanizes female-shaped anomalies, turning them into profitable myths. The newspaper advertisements survive, proving how public appetite fuels degradation. In 1566, the Chelmsford Assize documents show how Agnes Waterhouse's neighbor testimony meant a death sentence. The county rolls still list the execution. In 1612, the Lancaster Assizes preserve the depositions that sent the Pendle women to the gallows. And in Salem, 1692 court transcripts, the indictments, the spectral testimony, illustrate how community panic creates legal mechanisms for erasure. Each file and folded paper is not an abstract footnote. They are the procedural backbone of a system that turns rumor into punishment. But here's where it ramps up. These elements cluster. Silence followed by spectacle. Bodily alteration followed by legal ownership. Accusation followed by disappearance. This is not scattered cruelty. Look to ports and courts, where maritime folk beliefs, emerging natural science, and property law intersected. A sailor's sighting becomes an object for a naturalist's book. That joins a showman's banner. That informs a magistrate's suspicion. The mermaid is not merely myth. She is the node where entertainment, law, and misogyny meet. The price the Little Mermaid pays, her voice, her feet, her life, reads exactly like the ledger entries and execution warrants that document real-world strategies for controlling women. Imagine reading the very pages where these lives are recorded. The curled hand of a clerk in Salem in 1692. Ink blotting as a witness describes a spectral shape. The adverts pasted to a New York board in 1842, promising a wonder for a quarter. The margin notes in Gessner's 1558 volumes, annotating a mermaid with the same hand that records remedies for common childbirth complaints. Those pages stitch the fairy tale to bureaucratic and commercial appetite. When you put those pieces together, the sanitized story unravels. The Little Mermaid turns out to be less a romantic heroine and more a composite of historical mechanisms designed to silence, disfigure, and erase women through law, through spectacle, through accusation. You can no longer look at Anderson's tale or Barnum's displays and see only innocent fantasy. You see the long, deliberate machinery that turned women into bargains and curiosities. The next time you hear the music swell as she approaches the prince, remember the court papers and the pamphlets hidden beneath that tune. Myths do not float free. They are shaped by the most practical hands: clerks, judges, impresarios. The Little Mermaid's bargain was never just about love. It was a map of social control inked in real dates and names. Agnes Waterhouse, 1566. Pendle women, so 1612. Bridget Bishop, June 10th, 1692. Den Lila Havfru, 1837. The Fiji Mermaid, 1842. Gessner's Historiae, Animalium, 1558. Once you see those markers, the foam at the story's end is not fantasy fluff. It is the sound of a long history trying to wash its tracks clean. You will not be able to hear that song the same way again.